Hi, it's Tom Jordan. We have a lot to talk about this morning. I want to first start off with the breaking news overnight. You're probably up last night and you heard about this. We have more information now about this jet crash approaching, in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. No survivors now. This is the actual collision right there. Expected. No survivors are expected after that passenger jet collided with an Army helicopter near Reagan Airport. In fact, the plane was just seconds away from landing inbound from Wichita, Kansas into Washington, D.C. It's a devastating mid-air collision. That commercial jet carrying, they're saying more than 60 passengers, colliding with an Army Black Hawk helicopter near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. This is about 8:53, just before 9 o'clock last night. No survivors are expected. They have been combing. That's the Potomac. Looking into the Potomac all night after this happened. Again, right about 9 o'clock, a huge presence of emergency vehicles on the scene almost right after this had occurred, and they've not been able to find any survivors to this point. So now they've changed it to a kind of a recovery mission now, confirming this morning that the mission has shifted from rescue to recovery. So very incredibly sad situation. The Washington, D.C. fire and the EMS chief, his name is John Donnelly. He said this morning that, at this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident. And the emergency crews, they've so far recovered 27 bodies from the jet and then one from the helicopter, with the wreckage being scattered across the Potomac River. And so we're looking into that, but it's aviation safety is going to be paramount in the Donald Trump presidency. There was some pushback saying the Biden administration was prioritizing climate change policies and green energy initiatives. The critics are saying, no, we got to real focus. When you're talking about the transportation department, you got to focus on the real issues there, and that's aviation safety and military preparedness and all of these things. Now, I'm not casting blame on anybody. I think this was a strange situation. There's a lot of questions as to how this had occurred, because obviously in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of Black Hawk helicopters flying about in that region, carrying a lot of diplomats, a lot of military VIPs back and forth. You got the Pentagon there, you got the CIA, you got the White House, you got Capitol Hill, and there's just a lot of movement in the airspace around the White House. And so it's a very complex, aviation system they have there, probably the most complex potentially in the entire world. There at Ronald Reagan particularly. There's three main airports around the D.C. area. There's Ronald Reagan, of course, and there's Baltimore, BWI. That's the furthest one out when that kind of serves the D.C. area. And, of course, there's the other one in Virginia as well, which I use most frequently. And I don't know if, that's a little distance out from Reagan. So anyway, the tragedies, there's a whole lot of questions that are being raised about the airspace coordination, the risks of, compromised defense operations, what happened here. But the bottom line is there are a lot of families right now that are awaiting some answers as the officials are working to recover and now identify the victims. So our prayers are with those families. The first thing I thought of last night when I heard this is because, one moment you're alive, the next moment you're dead, and all these families waiting for their loved ones at the airport, coming in from Wichita, Kansas, many returning from an ice skating championship there. So there are members apparently of the U.S. skating team, the Russian skating team that just completed this competition there in Wichita, coming back to the D.C. area, now to tragedies. So we'll keep an update on that and let you know the latest there. Listen, we talked about this next topic, this very thing last week. It was on Tom Jordan Live. We had Jimmy Plasky in with EP Wealth Advisors and warning us of this high-tech bubble that it might burst soon. Well. Look what happened on Monday. Monday comes around, and kind of what Jimmy Plasky was talking to us about occurred. And kind of maybe in an unexpected way. This is, Wall Street just got this stark reminder of what happens when China enters the artificial intelligence race, AI, with its own, deep-pocketed players. There's DeepSeek. That's this Chinese AI model, just shook up the entire tech industry landscape, and it crushed Nvidia stock on Monday, wiping out nearly $600 billion off its market value in a single day. So Monday evening comes around, people are scratching their heads. Okay, now what? So the Nasdaq Composite, that took a major hit, dropping 3% as the AI investors were reeling from this news. So DeepSeek, a rapid rise. It's no coincidence, of course. It's a direct result of China's relentless push to dominate artificial intelligence and, really bypassing these very expensive U.S. designed chips that are needed for this. So they were doing it on the cheap, so to speak, but very effectively, it seems. Unless you're going to ask about Tiananmen Square in 1989, then suddenly has no information about that. Don't ask me why we have Napoleon Dynamite and Bonaparte on the screen there. That's a part of a longer story. So, anyways, there's a lot of shakeup going on there. The model, the Chinese model there, reportedly matches the capabilities of OpenAI's ChatGPT and Meta's Llama, but really at a fraction of the cost. So if you could do it on the cheap, that's good news, it appears. But is it really? Because that sent shockwaves through the AI stocks. Yeah, it hammered, as I said, Nvidia. But you got Microsoft, you got Google, you have all these other companies. Meta seemed to actually buck the trend here by investing in a pretty hefty $65 billion in capital expenditures to keep up with the AI arms race. Okay, what does this mean for investors? Because again, Jimmy Plasky and I spoke about the potential for a bubble burst last week, and it kind of occurred. So Wall Street bears are out there now saying they're trying to paint this as a catastrophic turning point. But is that realistic? Is that what is happening here? Like the whole market changed? Does DeepSeek's success really signal the end for Nvidia or the U.S. AI sector? Is any major global company going to rely on a Chinese startup for mission critical AI infrastructure? Or is Nvidia and the like, they're still king when it comes to AI and robotics? So how should investors respond to this? And it seems to me that the AI revolution here, it's far from over. This is just, it could be considered a hiccup. It could be considered a wait things out type of things. And NVIDIA's setback might just be part of the normal way of doing business and fighting to stay on top. It's what you do in a very competitive industry. All right, Jimmy Plasky agreed to come back to talk more about this. Jimmy's from, of course, EP Wealth Advisors, formerly Executive Wealth Management, the major merger with a giant EP Wealth Advisors. So, Jimmy, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming back.
Absolutely. Good morning. Glad to be here.
So we were kind of onto something last week. We're talking about, Nvidia and what it seemed to be maybe the overvaluation of the tech stocks and tech industries. When you saw what happened on Monday, what was your general impression? And when you think of it from an investment standpoint, what were your thoughts, your takeaways when this occurred on Monday?
First, I'd say hindsight's 2020, right? I'm glad we're talking on Thursday.
Yes.
But initially, there's that concern, right? When something comes out that's a disruptor, if you're not on that train or ahead of it or know what that disruptor is, there's always that initial concern. And I would say that's really the case with investments as well. So as you look at DeepSeek, what happened on Monday, that is the shakeup that we talked about just the other week.
Yeah.
That since 2023, these Magnificent Seven stocks have run the economy. We've had a major run up in value, that the only way to access AI was through Nvidia, was through this really expensive platform. And DeepSeek showed that there was another alternative. Now, I can be very bullish and bearish on it, and I think we'll talk about both to a degree. But I think someone's heading the sand if they really thought that Nvidia was the only chip maker, that open source and ChatGPT and Meta and Llama were the only AI companies out there. We know it's not the case. They were the first, right? But does that necessarily mean they're going to be the best? Who knows? So those disruptors are there, and we know that it might not take as much money. But the one thing I will also say is with China, how much do you trust them? Right? They came out and said they spent that much money and that they were using low-end NVIDIA chips. Is that necessarily the case? I think only time will tell. But that initial news, is worrisome for NVIDIA, but I think for the rest of the market, it's not necessarily a terrible thing.
Okay. So when you think about this is a Chinese-owned company, DeepSeek and whatnot. And do you think investors are wary of putting a lot of their money into what appears to be a company that is under the thumb of the Chinese Communist Party, or does TikTok and the investments in that kind of dispel that concern that some investors might have?
Personally, I think there are concerns, right? It's like you said, under the thumb of the Chinese government. I think that's up for everyone to decide on their own. Same thing as you look at TikTok and what that was like. But I think the bigger story is just that there's open technology to the rest of the market. That, as we talked about the other week, that Magnificent Seven, and we'll say the S&P 500, the other 493 companies in the S&P 500, we'll say in theory now have access to cheaper AI. Right? That could be good for the overall economy, right? We talked about $600 billion being wiped out of Nvidia stock and the Nasdaq being down, but the Dow Jones was actually up.
Yeah.
Consumer staples were up.
Yes.
So if people are still bullish on the U.S. economy, that money's going somewhere, right? And is it to the defensive stocks, those consumer staples? It is, right? It's just flowing out of that technology, which, again, it's had a magnificent run up since 2023.
Yeah. So is the investment strategy changing, do you think, when people are looking at the tech stock? I mean, did the tech sector collapse? Did the bubble completely burst? Or did it correct itself? Or I mean, what would be your assessment on how Wall Street has reacted? Because as you said, the markets are up as a result of this. Maybe their investments are going elsewhere, which I think, militarily and whatnot, they probably are. But what's occurring right now? Are people pulling out of these stocks? Is there a massive sell-off going on? And should that be the case if it is?
I think that's, well, yes, with Nvidia, there is that sell-off for sure. We've seen that since Monday. Should that be the case? A little bit, right? What was propping up Nvidia? They were the only chip maker, and it was expensive, and the only way to get into AI was through them, right? And again, DeepSeek came out and said they used low-end Nvidia chips anyways. So they're still using the Nvidia chips. So again, I think it's just that fear that is selling everything. But in terms of that reset overall economy, is there a bubble burst? I think time will tell as we look at this, but I still think that we're on the forefront of AI, right? Technology has been a leading sector in our economy since I was in high school, right? And cell phones came out. I mean, I don't think that's changing, right? As we start to use AI in our business practices across the board.
Yeah. So Nvidia, they lost $600 billion, I think, in value in stock. Is that now an opportunity, do you think? You think, okay, well, they're not going to die. Nvidia's not going away. They just have maybe new competition right now.
Correct.
What does that mean for the investors? Should they, hey, the stocks are down right now. They're probably going to go back up. I mean, you can't predict. I know the future. You can't say that.
I wish I could.
I know. We'd all be a lot wealthier than we are right now. But it is, I guess, how would you coach one of your clients through this? Do you go through that? Do you go back to Nvidia? What do you do?
Yes. I mean, a properly diversified or allocated portfolio should not be too overweight in technology. So there might be a little bit pull down or a little bit of drag on that technology. But again, the rest of the portfolio is making up for that. So if someone was super overweight in technology or Nvidia stock, they're probably hurting a little bit, and there's a conversation that we should have. But most people are properly allocated, are doing okay because, again, the rest of the market is doing pretty well.
Okay, so I'm going to look at this. So Nvidia, their stock plunge was 17% on Monday. That was the $600 billion they lost in market value. It did rebound almost 9% on Tuesday, 8.9%. After some of the analysts, they kind of dismissed DeepSeek's rise as they kind of overblown.
Yeah.
So there's going to be even some correction of what happened on Monday. Does this kind of back and forth, this maybe someone would call extreme volatility, does it mean investors should obviously nobody should ever panic, but there is that tendency to do so?
Absolutely.
Or do you think this is just maybe a short-term overreaction to China's artificial intelligence play?
Both, right? It's definitely a short-term reaction. The market sells on fear. The news sells on fear, and there's fear that there's competition. So that's absolutely the case. But Nvidia is not going anywhere. Like I mentioned, DeepSeek came out and said they use low-end Nvidia chips.
Yeah, right.
So Nvidia still made the chips.
Yes.
So if you're an investor
for DeepSeek, correct? Yeah, they're still using them.
So if you believe in that in AI or in the future, then Nvidia is still making the chips.
Yeah.
Yes, the value is still there. Now, again, that's for individuals and your financial professional and their team to look at it. Is it overvalued? Is it a time to buy? right? Not a recommendation I'd give right now, but it's definitely something to review. If you're bullish on that sector, on that part of the economy, then absolutely, there's always a consideration to buy when things pull back.
Do you think when you're looking at the entire AI industry, it is neck break speed in terms of its growth and its capabilities? And that's why I look at kind of the tech sector is something that's still going to be incredibly a good place to invest for the foreseeable future. Would you, maybe it's not Nvidia the whole way, but there are other, this is not going away. You can't stop it. That's why we brought up the Napoleon images earlier, because he said, quote, you can't really stop it. You just need somebody in there, whatever is growing right now, to help direct the growth of whatever industry happens to be succeeding. So in that sector itself, do you still feel like that is a place where, boy, you're going to be looking at as an investor, or as you're guiding investors through their portfolios?
I think you have to, right? I mean, this Stargate project they were talking about, right? What is that?
Right.
$500 billion they're putting into AI, these large companies. It's not going anywhere. I think it's just like someone putting their head in the sand when saying the internet wasn't going to take off, right? Or someone said the same thing. Social media is not going to exist, right? Things innovate, things change. We can't predict the future. And so I think you have to be open and understanding to what AI is, and it should be a piece of the portfolio. Absolutely.
Do you look at these overseas markets like China? Because I know that when Joe Biden was in office, the Biden administration was trying to put in some regulations to prevent things like this happening. And sure enough, they come around. There were these chip restrictions, like in China and elsewhere, especially with foreign adversaries, that we were going to prevent them from doing this. And lo and behold, this happens on Monday. The secret is out. I don't know what you think of that. Do you think that how does that? I guess my question has to do with government regulations on private industries. Will they be effective, and should investors consider those regulations as they're looking out in places to invest?
Government regulation is always going to have an impact, right? I think that gets into more of a philosophical conversation, maybe, right? That, personally, I believe that we shouldn't have too much government regulation over it, right? That we should allow the open market to work in that capacity. But I think as you look at what happened yesterday with Jerome Powell coming out and saying they're not going to cut interest rates, right? There was concern with regulation, right? With Trump and the new administration, he said a whole bunch of stuff in terms of tariffs, in terms of how we're going to generate revenue. He came out and talked about the income tax, right? So there's a bunch of news that those regulations do impact our market and economy. And again, the Fed came out and agreed that and said, hey, if some of these regulations do have an impact, it could impact inflation. It could impact our GDP at the end of the day. Yeah. Right. So
what do you think about that? I mean, do you think, okay, so the next quarter, next time Jerome Powell comes around, do you think there's going to be what's your prediction of what the Fed and Jerome Powell is going to do? I know it's hard again to do this because I was speaking a lot with my brother back in California. He's in a certain industry out there that really depends on what the Fed does on a regular basis. And the assumption was last year that he was going to dramatically cut interest rates. That didn't happen last year, a little bit. I think what in total probably came down, maybe
less than 1%.
Yeah, it was less than 1%. I don't know, it was 0.75 or 0.50, but I think it was less than 1%. What are your feelings about what might happen with the Fed going in throughout 2025?
Yeah, I
see you shaking your head. I don't know.
Because you don't know, right? I mean, there's such uncertainty. I mean, I think if some of the new administration's policies come into effect, so in some of the tariffs, some of the ability for us to collect revenue, we should see rates come down a little bit, right? If inflation does sit, I think that 2% number they're trying to look at. Yeah. So if it does kind of sit there and doesn't spike up, then we should be in a good spot. But the Fed isn't bringing down interest rates because there's signs of a strong economy still. So it isn't necessarily a bad thing that rates are still up, right? Because there are signs that the economy is still strong, that we don't have to cut rates.
Right.
So do I think they will? Yes. But again, if the economy stays strong and we're collecting revenue as a country, again, through these tariffs and the other sources that we've talked about, we might be okay keeping rates where they're at.
When Jerome Powell says he doesn't want to do anything because of the uncertainty in the markets and whatnot, what does he mean by that? I mean, what do you think is his broader concern here? Because when I look at tax cuts, That seems to bode well for businesses, and they tend to invest more. And that should be something that's not necessarily uncertain, but may certainly have an impact in the positive realm for the markets and for the economy overall. What do you what was your sense about what he meant by the uncertainty of it all?
Uh, that's exactly what it is the uncertainty. And that's a cheesy answer to say it like that. But the uncertainty of the economy that we look at, let's talk about Nvidia, why we're having this conversation in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? That we do have these Magnificent Seven propped up a little bit. That we do have, again, a new administration that has changed our country in the last 10 days, just like the last administration has done.
Yeah.
So a lot of this stuff has to shake out, right? That we don't know what things are going to look like in 2 months from now, let alone next week. So when he says there's uncertainty, I absolutely believe that. I mean, every day we come to work looking at that. I mean, if you go back to 2020, right? We had elections in 2024, which was, I think, 40% of the free world had elections that was supposed to have a ton of uncertainty that we weathered. 2023 was supposed to be one of the biggest market corrections in history, which it wasn't, and we weathered. 2022 interest rates, or forgive me, China and Russia and Ukraine. That war starts in February, which is supposed to affect the economy. 2021 interest rates, 2020 COVID. I mean, you can keep going to all these times of uncertainty, so it's going to be there. But as the Fed, and they make decisions on our economy and our country, they can't just go out on a whim, right? And so I think him taking this time to say, okay, we got to weather this storm and see what this new administration is going to do is the wise decision.
Yeah.
We can't just cut
What
rates.
brings more certainty to a market? Because you said because you don't know if wars are going to break out. There's always that no one can foretell what's going to come around the corner just next
Correct.
week,
Yeah, no
next
one
month,
can.
next
Yes.
year. But what makes you feel like a Jerome Powell that, okay, we're pretty certain at this point that this is the direction the economy is going to go? I mean, what are some key indicators that, okay, we can make this decision based on these metrics, or like what do you look for when you think about certainty?
You're always looking at jobs, right? We're looking at new builds. We're looking at imports and exports. We're looking at the kind of revenue that our country is making, the deficit of our country. So as some of these things get better, the job reports come out and the jobs look better, right? As inflation continues to drop, that looks good. Our imports and exports have been overall relatively strong. But again, we haven't charged enough for some of the imports that we're bringing in, right? Or charging others enough for the exports that we're sending them. So I think that has to get corrected. And then the uncertainty that we look at with the Doge and the economy, or forgive me, the administration and correcting our budget. I think as that gets corrected, that brings a little bit more certainty as well, right? We're giving a lot of money to a lot of places. And as people see on the internet and as this news comes out, there are some pretty crazy things we're giving to a lot of people in countries that might not even be able to sustain themselves without the revenue that we're giving them.
Yes.
So I think as that stuff gets straightened out, that gives strength and optimism to our country as a whole.
Yeah, very good answer, because I think the biggest uncertainty right now is how this potential increase in tariffs on other countries is going to impact, obviously globally, these other countries, but also the United States. So that's the big question, because there's a lot of conflicting opinions on what is going to happen amongst conservatives and amongst liberals as well. So that does need to be hashed out.
Yeah, and we like seeing the news instantaneous every moment that it happens and making those decisions. And we still have to take a step back and say, okay, we've had one of the biggest changes in American political history in the last few months, right? In terms of an administration that we never really heard from for 4 years to one that now we're hearing from 10 times a day, right? Pros and cons to each of those, let every person make their own decision. But those are big changes, right? And the political shift of what was happening with the old administration in terms of immigration, right? In terms of some of those tariffs and the immediate changes. So there is some uncertainty that as that stuff gets straightened out, we'll have some more clarification, but it might not be until midsummer, until the end of the year. I mean, again, every day we're hearing about these new ice raids and things like that, where is it good? Is it bad? Again, it's everyone's own decision to make, but it's more news. It's more uncertainty. And uncertainty causes panic, and panic causes volatility in the market.
I was laughing at there was a reporter in the White House, I think it was 5 days into the new administration, and the reporter asked, you've been here 5 days and egg prices are up. What are you doing to keep them? I'm like, 5 days in the new administration. It's like you're asking about why egg prices are so sky high when they've been that case they've been going up for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's just, you're right. We need to have patience. We need to look at the long-term trends here. When you look at companies like now Meta committing $65 billion, Microsoft, they're investing or planning to invest $80 billion into this kind of AI infrastructure. Those you mentioned the U.S. tech leaders that met at the White House, I think it was last week, they're pledging $500 billion under the Trump administration to invest in artificial intelligence because there's tons of potential there. Should investors, do you think that they should probably expand within the AI industry, maybe not just chip makers, but other relevant companies and businesses that are contributing to the artificial intelligence industry? So you can actually diversify within AI itself, can't you?
Absolutely. I mean, think of what they're trying to do with AI, from shopping markets to trucking and shipping, logistics, right? Finance and taxes. I mean, it's going to be everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think of, when you said Meta, I think you said what, 80 million?
Meta's doing 80 billion.
80 billion.
Yeah.
Meta's market cap is 1.7 trillion. So yes, that's a lot of money, but to them, that's not as much.
True.
But when you think of a company like Meta, what is their value? Technology, being on the forefront of technology. I think of Meta and Ray-Ban trying to create the glasses, right? So we can see, and Apple has their own glasses. So they're trying to create that next best thing, because we as humans are going to crave that next piece of technology, especially with the learning curve, or not the learning curve, but the growth curve that we've seen of technology since, as I mentioned, the last 2 decades.
It's amazing. And AI itself in the last 2 years, what's happened in that sector of technology, artificial intelligence. So I think it's going to be much like the internet. It's not just one company that manages the internet. It affects everything in our lives and pretty much every other business that's out there. They're going to be using artificial intelligence. If not now, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, but pretty soon if they're not in it right now.
I can't think of one business that doesn't use the internet.
Oh, right.
Or an industry that doesn't.
No.
I mean, you could think of your tradesmen, but they have websites, right? They have to access their materials. They have to order their things online.
Yeah, if they're keeping their books, they're probably doing their books online as well. It affects you. So
Time cards are typically online now.
Correct.
So it's all online, right? Or I think of the movies On the Line. It's all online.
Yeah.
And so I think that as you look at these large players putting money towards it, they have to. They need to.
Yeah.
In order to survive, because if they don't create the next best thing, people are going to stop using it.
Well, there's always the best thing, and that's the human touch, and that's what you have at EP Wealth Advisors. That you can't be replaced. Neither can talk show hosts either. AI has nothing on us, so I think we're safe. I hope so. Jimmy Plasky with EP Wealth Advisors. Good to see you,
Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jimmy. All right, so much. It's concerning a little bit when you think about the rapid growth of artificial intelligence, but I look at what happened on Monday when I was watching that, thinking, okay, this is potentially just a blip. It seems like a huge deal when you see how the markets reacted to this Chinese company coming in. But listen, there are tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars being invested in artificial intelligence. So it's not over at all, especially if just one company comes. It's kind of like an exciting new thing. Hey, look, there's DeepSeek here. That's a brand new thing. Let's look over there. And then the next day, people go, yeah, it's not all that. So I think that's what's going on here. So listen, if you want to know about EP Wealth Advisors, they've been around actually. Well, Executive Wealth Management has for more than 40 years. And they have been a trusted community partner, Executive Wealth Management, helping Michigan families plan for what's important. Well, now, as part of EP Wealth Advisors, they've taken that mission to the next level. It's a merger that brings the benefits of a premier national firm, enhanced services, tools, and expertise, while still delivering the personal small business care that you've always valued. Whether they're all-in-one approach, they simplify, with their all-in-one approach, they simplify retirement planning, investment management, tax strategies, and more, so you can focus on what matters most to you. At Executive Wealth Management, now EP Wealth Advisors, you get the best of both worlds: trusted local service and big business benefits. You can call their Brighton regional office today. It's 810-229-9. I'm sorry. Let me say that again, because you got to have the right phone number here. It's 810-229-6446. Let me say that again. 810-229-6446. Boy, I'm getting that number wrong. 810-229-6446. And let them help you plan for what's important to you. Call them and tell them that Tom just kept messing up the phone number, but you found it anyway. So Anyway, Jimmy Plasky with EP Wealth Advisors, a good partner with Tom Jordan Live. All right, listen. There's a big crackdown going around the country here, and it's about dealing with very dangerous illegal immigrants in this country. New York City was on the forefront, and they've been cracking down because the crime rate in New York City has gone through the roof over the past few years. And a big part of that is the number of illegal immigrants that have gone to New York City, who are violent individuals, gang members who have been out on the streets time and again, committing crimes with no consequences. Well, there's a new administration in town, and now they're taking action. Take a look.
Well, the immigration crackdown is hitting every part of the country, with the new DHS Secretary Kristi Noem leading the effort in New York City. Violent criminals, including a Tren de Aragua member, have been arrested in the Big Apple, and residents there are celebrating.
I'm glad they're gone. I mean, I was planning on calling ICE, to be honest with you, so they got here before I was able to call them. There's 15 of them in a one-bedroom. They were destroying the building. They were constantly doing drugs in front. They were illegally squatting. They're criminals. They're destroying the apartment. If you go inside, it's destroyed.
Yeah, how about that reaction? Heritage Foundation Senior Communications Manager Matthew Tregesser joins me now. Matthew, good morning to you. So yesterday there was this big ICE raid in New York City. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem was there to support the effort. And during it, they actually arrested a member of Tren de Aragua, who authorities say was one of the people that was harassing this Aurora, Colorado apartment complex, and was seen in that widely played video of the incident last year. We're playing it on our screen right now. He was arrested yesterday. And a man who was wanted in the Dominican Republic for a double homicide was also arrested. Apparently he made his way here, and now he's in custody. So what is your reaction to how all of this is unfolding?
Well, good to be with you, Carly. Look, we have to applaud the Trump administration for taking initiative and acting quickly to remove these dangerous criminal aliens who have roamed freely for at least 4 years under the Biden-Harris administration. Look, Secretary Noem, Border Czar Tom Homan, President Trump, they've all focused on 8 immigration-related executive orders to restrict immigration, to secure our borders better. And so they're acting as quickly as they can. But let's not forget, there were hundreds of thousands of criminals, potentially also with unvetted backgrounds, entering our country. And so, you know, that's going to take some time to remove them from the country. Thankfully, ICE, they're deporting well over 1,000 individuals so far. That number should increase. But, you know, we can only really applaud the Trump administration for taking initiative and acting quickly.
Yeah, and you heard the reaction from one of the residents in New York City that we just played, saying, I was going to call ICE myself. Thank God these people are getting arrested. The New York Post has a piece out today, including other reaction from residents. One person said, oh, thank God they got him, referring to the gang member, the Tren de Aragua member. Another person said, get them the heck off the streets, get them the heck off the streets so people don't have to walk in fear. So understandable statements from people who have been living in fear and are sick and tired of it, which is why Mayor Eric Adams says that he will comply with ICE to get these criminals off the streets.
Yeah. So New York Mayor Eric Adams, he is now complying. Originally, he was saying he was very supportive of New York being like a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants until they started coming to his city. And then he saw firsthand the damage that it's doing to the citizens and to the city itself, and the millions of dollars it takes to just care for these illegal immigrants, that the burden was put upon them. And the Biden administration was flying them in to New York and other states without their knowledge to it. So bringing them to various states around the country for whatever reason. Why was this happening? And gaslighting all of us here, saying that there is no rise in the crime rate from illegal immigrants in this country. It's not happening. It's just a right-wing talking point. Pay no attention. Well, it was happening in real time, and most of us knew it who were willing to really pay attention to this. And that's why I'm thankful for, alternative media outlets, because I don't think without alternative media, we would not have gotten the real picture of what was going on. Because again, the main networks, NBC, CBS, ABC, they were all in on it. And they're still arguing today. Margaret Brennan arguing against deporting violent illegal immigrants from this country. You may have seen that with J.D. Vance. And it's like, why are you so opposed to protecting individuals in this country? That's what it comes down to. Why are you so in on hurting the victims of crime, so instead of protecting them? All right, so that's that. So I'm glad that this is happening, and it should happen quickly. There's a lot of work to do. It's going to take months and months and probably years to undo the damage that the Biden administration has done to U.S. citizens. All right, update now on the horrible crash last night in just outside of Washington, D.C. That is the collision, unfortunately, right there between, look at that, just goes down into the Potomac River. 60 people on board that flight coming into Washington, D.C., and you can see the fire there and the flames and the explosion. And there's the emergency crews out there. We know that there are some U.S. figure skaters who are among those who are on board. They're coming back from Wichita, Kansas. There was an ice skating championship there. There were some apparently Russian skaters as well on board that flight from Wichita to D.C. By the way, that flight has only been around, I think, for about a year. So this is the latest here. The FAA issues a ground stop at Reagan Washington National Airport after it was the military helicopter. It was a Black Hawk, collided with the American Airlines plane. It was about 9 o'clock last night. I think the actual time was just before, about 8:53. And yeah, the Army had confirmed that this was a Black Hawk helicopter. It had 3 soldiers on board from Bravo Company 12th Aviation Battalion out of Davison Army Airfield, and was conducting a training flight in that vicinity. The president, Donald Trump, he has been briefed on this. He has been pouring out his heartfelt condolences to the family there. And he said, you know what, something is wrong here. When he looked at the video, this should not have happened, and it should have been prevented. And there's a lot of questions as to why this collision occurred in the first place. We think their airport's going to be closed until 11 o'clock this morning, one of the busiest in the world, by the way. First responders still searching the Potomac River. They've recovered, I think, more than a couple dozen bodies so far. They're not expecting any survivors. The mayor of Wichita, she has come out this morning and spoken about this. Her name is Lily Wu. She became very emotional this morning during her press conference, and she expressed sorrow, of course, for those that died on the American Airlines flight 5342. After that plane collided, she's hoping this will bring unity, with her city, Washington, D.C., and hopefully the nation. 60 passengers, 4 crew on that flight that crashed and just erupted into a fireball. We know more about the fact that this was a training flight. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave an update as well, saying that the Army helicopter that collided with the American Airlines jet was on that training flight. He said about 8:48 last night that the UH-60, that's the Black Hawk, assigned to the U.S. Army Aviation Brigade in the Military District of Washington, collided with that civilian airliner. So it was even earlier than I had thought. I thought it was 8:53. It was 8:48 last night. It was this annual proficiency training flight. He declined, Pete Hegseth did, to identify the 3 soldiers who are on board that until, of course, next of kin has been notified. But just a tragic situation. It started about a year ago, that flight from Wichita to Washington, D.C., and boy, it's going to have consequences for years to come. I remember oftentimes when there's a crash of this magnitude in such a condensed area like this, and they end up spending quite a bit of time investigating how this could have been prevented, and new solutions come up. I can remember back, I think it was 1978, there was a major airline crash. PSA Airlines crashed into San Diego. That was a collision as well from, I think, a Cessna that was taken off, and that was a training exercise as well, like a pilot instructor training a student how to fly, and they ended up colliding directly with a PSA jet like this, which knocked down the PSA, and they both, crashed. Everybody on board was killed. I remember that day very well, 1978. But what resulted after that tragedy in the investigation, the subsequent investigation, was a complete change on the approach into San Diego's Lindbergh Field. because at the time they were making these sharp banks right into the airport like this, and that's when this collision occurred. They end up rerouting it. You had to go several miles out of the airport and then turn around and then fly in directly for that flight path when you're landing into, that was Lindbergh Field. Something may happen here as well. This is an incredibly busy airport. I think they handle about 25,000 passengers a day at Reagan. And I think it was only built to handle 15,000. So something's got to happen. One of the busiest, and there's three major airports right around that area. You got Dulles there in Virginia, you got Reagan National, and then you got Baltimore, Washington International as well. All of them serving that vicinity. So, gosh, we pray for those people, for the people involved in that, the families that are just learning that their loved one didn't make it. And they likely know it by now, even if it's not official. They haven't officially identified the bodies, knowing that they're on that flight and there are no survivors. That is just tragedy. It breaks my heart. All right. We have some comments here, some maybe questions as well. Let's bring them up. Cameron Harris is watching those. So, Cameron, what you got for us first off here? We'll bring up, I'm going to guess the name. It's Annie. I was going to guess Annie. Hi, Annie. Being from this area, I cannot help but remember the 1982 crash into the Potomac. Yeah, prayers for God's comfort for the families of these 64 souls. Yes, I remember that. We were discussing this last night about that crash. It does take us back to that 1980s collision when that plane crashed into the Potomac as well during the wintertime in frigid conditions. And there were some heroic activities, people jumping in to the Potomac and rescuing individuals. I remember the video from that, or the film, whatever they did back there in 1982, of people swimming in the water that were victims of a plane crash, a major one that crashed in, I think it was a bridge over the Potomac, and of course went into the water. Amazing that happened again in a different way this time around, but it's incredibly sad. I share, your sentiments, Annie. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it very much. Let's bring up another one here. Joe Rio. Hey, Joe, how are you? DeepSeek is more than AI. It is a geopolitical statement for the multipolar world to help them escape from U.S. tech hegemony and oppression. To help them escape from U.S. tech and oppression. Interesting take there. Are you saying that the United States is oppressing those in China? Is that what you're getting at here? Or is it the reverse? Because I think what's really happening here is that China has really the leg up here, because they've been the ones pretty much in control of many of the, at least the minerals and whatnot that control the semiconductors in the development of them and the manufacturing that occurs. I'm not exactly sure where you're going with that, but thank you for your comment. I do appreciate it. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Tom Jordan Live. I always appreciate your comments, your questions, and for taking part in this conversation as well. Remember, we're on YouTube, Spotify, X, Apple Podcast, and Facebook as well, in case you forgot, like I almost did as well. All these platforms we're on. Thank you so much. God bless you. We'll see you back here tomorrow, 9 o'clock.